Since the end of apartheid, while millions of blacks have been educated and risen out of poverty, South Africa has been dubbed the rape capital of the world by Interpol, with a staggering 1 in 3 South African men admitting to rape. The country is in shambles, government corruption is endemic, the HIV/AIDS rates are among the highest in the world, and life expectancy in that country since 1994 is plummeting. But it is crime, and violent crime, and what former police minister Hathi Nehleko calls a prevalent culture of violence that permeates the blood-soaked streets of South Africa, which saw in 2016 its murder rate increase by a whopping 4.9% year on year, with more than 50 people murdered every day, and a bumbling and incompetent police force that lends to a shockingly low conviction rate of only 10% of those murders. In fact, even among the harshest critics of apartheid, there is an acknowledgement that in many ways the Rainbow Nation under the African National Congress is heading downhill fast. And it is the mismanagement, corruption, and predatory politics practiced at all levels of government that is transforming South Africa into just another failed sub-Saharan country.
Proceed.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. You see, some of us don't know English properly.
Can
and then
Honorable
we
Madisha,
can only come and say,
Honorable
hong,
Madisha,
hong, 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 like that.
Honorable
member.
Madisha,
Yes. Hong, hong, hong.
Honorable Madisha,
Hong, hong,
Honorable Madisha.
That's the only thing that she knows.
Honorable Madisha.
Yes. Thank you.
Honorable Madisha. Yesterday, Honorable Member, yesterday in this House, Honorable Carter, who is your member, raised a point of order around members who were making animal noises. And we asked them to withdraw. And can you please withdraw what you have just done?
I withdraw that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I withdraw.
Honorable Madisha.
Honorable Chairperson.
An inconvenient fact is that it was whites that built the nation of South Africa, and now that they've handed it over to the black majority, their continued existence in the country looks precarious, so much so that many are openly asking if there is any future for white people in the country their ancestors created. Sub-Saharan Africa since the end of colonization has been one of mass famine, blood-soaked coups d'etats, tribal, ethnic, and civil wars, as well as genocide. This, in turn, is fueling the growing migrant crisis, slamming into Europe via those fleeing their failed societies and producing one of the largest migratory waves in human history. When the apartheid system was abolished in 1994, the African National Congress stepped in and replaced the white ruling party with their own cadres, and for a time, it was business as usual. However, unemployment, crime, and corruption is higher than ever before. And in the meantime, the common dweller in a South African township is no better off today than during the time of the previous white regime. In fact, many would say the steep rise in violent crime, including rape and murder, as well as electricity blackouts and the lack of clean water, have in fact made his lot in life worse. This failure of government competence at all levels is now on full display as in less than 90 days, Cape Town may become the world's first major city to run out of water. And instead of solving or preventing the problem, the chaos and corruption that is South African politics made it worse. Many in Cape Town openly say that the governing ANC party had no interest in preventing a predictable disaster in the only province run by the opposition Democratic Alliance Party, which is the most multiracial party in South Africa and draws its support predominantly from Afrikaans and English-speaking people. Thus, if reserves reach 13.5%, the municipality, which is South Africa's legislative capital, home to the second largest population in the country and the third largest economic hub on the continent, will stop providing piped water to most households and businesses. But this is nothing new. This is just the tip of the iceberg in the corruption-riddled and incompetent governance of the Rainbow Nation. But everyone in South Africa, regardless of color, will say that white people are still riding high. They run the economy, they have a disproportionate amount of influence in politics and the media. But not all of them. Many white South Africans now say that it's becoming harder and harder for them to get a job because of affirmative action policies that cater to the majority, and that whites are now living in poverty in greater numbers, with an estimated 400,000 of them living in squatter camps. But what is absolutely more pressing is that currently, according to the Institute of Security Studies in South Africa, being a white farmer in that country is statistically one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. In the first 40 days of 2018, there were 41 farm attacks and 5 murders on white farms. What makes these farm murders different from a country that's already swimming in blood is the sheer savagery, barbarism, and inhumanity involved, especially the ubiquitous rape of women and the unnecessary sadism inflicted upon the victims. Moreover, images have now surfaced indicating that perhaps signal jammers are now being used in farm attacks, making it impossible for victims to call for help. And many point to this as being only more evidence that a low-intensity war is being conducted against farmers by trained soldiers, thought to be mostly from the former Zimbabwean army and guerrilla forces in conjunction with local people. The actual number of farmers murdered depends on your sources. Outlets like the BBC predictably say there's no way to really know, and others call it racism to even bring up the fact that whites are being slaughtered by blacks. One thing, however, is for sure: the pressure is building. This is the president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, singing a variation of Shoot the Boer or Shoot the White Farmer in early 2012 during a celebration by the African National Congress. President Zuma himself, for some time, has called for white land to be expropriated without compensation, and his call has been picked up by the incoming ANC leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, who has made it clear that he wishes to distribute land without compensation as soon as he can gather the needed support to change the constitution. To add to this, in government, along with the ANC, the Economic Freedom Fighters, basically a radical black nationalist party with Marxist leanings, and is the third largest party in the parliament, is also demanding that white land and businesses be seized. Its leader, Julius Malema, who was expelled from the ANC, has urged black South Africans to take the land from white invaders, or what he calls Dutch thugs. In Parliament, he explained that his party wanted to unite black people in South Africa to expropriate white land without compensation. As recently as November 2016, he has magnanimously stated that, in his words, "We are not calling for the slaughter of white people. At least for now." Given that the statements by Malema, the leader of the EFF, that whites will be slaughtered unless they give up all land in South Africa, and this sentiment being echoed by President Zuma and ANC leader Ramaphosa, in terms of land redistribution, the plight of whites in South Africa does indeed, over the long term, look bleak, or in other words, Rhodesia 2.0. And should land confiscations go ahead, a very clear and predictable future for South Africa can be forecasted. Its economic fate will be reminiscent to that of its neighbor Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, where shortly after a similar confiscation of white land, well, it turned the country from the breadbasket of Africa to a basket case as food production plummeted and the economy disintegrated into a hyperinflationary vortex. It took Zimbabwe 15 years to admit their mistake, and they are now begging white farmers to return. Given the track record of general failure in post-colonial Africa and the very clear and present example of Zimbabwe, and in articles written in the prestigious Foreign Policy magazine, there is not a single successful black nation anywhere on earth and this should give the leaders of South Africa pause. And given the penchant for grotesque violence and genocide instigated by not only security services, but average citizens in African countries, Rwanda being a very good example of this, there have now been calls for whites to be allowed the right of return to Europe. And given the collaborative media silence that attends the ongoing disintegration of post-apartheid South Africa, it's astounding that the vaunted and hopelessly leftist legacy media, including the BBC, are now openly asking if white people have a future in Africa. But even with all this, and with the targeted ethnic murders, the discriminatory affirmative action laws for the majority, and the continual threats of genocide and land confiscation by their own government, countries like Canada as late as 2017 have refused asylum requests by white Afrikaners because concerns for their children or their mothers being assaulted and raped was, in the Canadian Immigration and Refugee Board's words, based on patently unreliable racist propaganda. A government lawyer for the CIRB said that fear of white children being raped by blacks was, in their words, highly offensive, as the information the family relied on was, quote, white supremacist hate literature, unquote, that should be ignored. With no help coming and with no one to take them in and being told that they are racist and bigots for even trying to protect their families from murder, and with their own government against them, what's most important now is getting information like this out about what's happening to this persecuted minority that is constantly being threatened with genocide by the majority of their countrymen as well as by their very own government. See Lauren Southern's new documentary for a look into the farm murders in particular. And if you haven't done so already, you need to contact your local congressman or member of parliament and demand that they get up to speed about what is happening in South Africa. We also need to put real pressure on President Trump. Maybe start a hashtag on Twitter, he seems to always be there, to not only perhaps intervene in South Africa, but also stop a planned $310.5 million in foreign aid to a country whose rulers have not only driven it into the ground, but threatened to massacre the minority that created it in the first place, and because of global pressure, including the entire Western world, handed it over to them. I myself have restarted a petition that asks for South Africans to be allowed the right of return to European nations. Please add your name to it, information is in the description, or start your own for Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or the United States. Post-apartheid, post-Mandela South Africa has a choice. It can either use the talent and knowledge of all of its people to try and build a better society for everybody, or it can confiscate the land and businesses of its white minority and fracture into a racial and tribal war and join the rest of sub-Saharan Africa as its newest failed state. Ironically, many of which are now being economically colonized by an assertive China, a China that has little care for democracy, human rights, and even human life.
按说是你们受欧洲国家管理这么长时间，应该是学到了很多先进的管理经验。
哪有多少时间？没多少时间了。我们炒那个要那个国经济啊，很炒。现在是50年，最近50年那个。就是
50年以前，你不是受他们
50年以前什么都好啊。
是啊，那个先进的影响，那个代代往传下来，越传越文明越发达了，怎么越来越倒退，越落后了？ 你看这么先进的铁路，我都1930几年就有电气化铁路，我都是中国啥时候才有电气化铁路的？把原有留下的东西根本都没有更加的爱护保护去利用它，反而都遭到了毁灭性的重创，就成了这样子的嘛。只有慢慢经过几代人，他是。 就是中国说的那句话：“今人有酒今人醉，明人没酒喝凉水。”就是，就这样子。